folks, and welcome to another episode of the Snowy's Camping Show. You are here as usual with Ben and Lauren, and today we are talking about fuel storage options for camping. But before we get into it, if you haven't subscribed, do so please wherever you listen to your podcasts, favourite podcasts, and also through YouTube if you're with us on YouTube as well. You can also jump into Facebook. We have the Snowy's Camping Show group on Facebook where we get feedback from you guys about the episodes, things you want to hear us discuss in the future, and if you've got any questions and things like that. So fuel storage options for camping.
Yep, this is a cool topic.
It is.
I reckon.
Is it a cool topic?
Well, yeah, maybe. I think it is.
It's a cool topic for you.
I always get a bit lost in the weights and consumptions and stuff, and you can go down a right rabbit hole in fuel consumption and stuff. And I don't think we touch on how many litres per 100 kilometres a car is using and that sort of thing, because you'll get every opinion under the sun.
Variables.
Everyone's just trying to be more efficient than the next person.
Totally.
At the end of the day, let's just assume you're going to use fuel when you're travelling, and you're going to need to refuel that fuel. So I think enough said on that topic, and everyone else can say how much consumption they get, but I've already gone off on a tangent.
This episode's going to probably appeal to more four-wheel drivers and people who are doing long trips or trips where they are literally going into the sticks for periods of time as well. It's not so relevant for your weekend campers and things like that. No. But realistically, how much fuel should you carry?
Well, we were just looking at some stats, and there's things out there that say, and we'll touch on carrying fuel inside and outside of the car, but all we'll say here today is based on our research. We're not authorities on the topic, so please do check with your local regulatory board or regulatory organisations on what you're legally allowed to carry. This is what we found out in our research, and certainly be great to open up this conversation to all of our listeners and maybe even people out there who can, clear some things up, because every forum's got a different opinion. But it seems like you can carry up to 250 litres of fuel in your car. Well, not in your car, sorry, on your car. It's got to be in jerry cans or something
ridiculous,
like that. It's a stupid amount of fuel.
That came from, just as a point of reference, it came from the Queensland, I think, Department of Transport, their website or whatever, something along those lines.
I've also seen it on RACQR, a lot of sites say that. So there obviously is something around that number.
That's right.
That is a lot of
We
fuel.
were just like, why the heck would you want to carry 250 litres of fuel?
Oh, I don't know. Well, I mean, I just did some maths.
That's like 12 20 litre jerry cans.
Yeah, because I love maths. But
you love maths.
250 litres of diesel is a bit over 200 kilos. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that's on top of the fuel you've already got in the car. It's not clear on that. I didn't look into it in that much detail. But
it specifically states that you can't carry more than 250 litres of fuel, like petrol, ethanol, et cetera, in jerry cans.
Which suggests
it specifies jerry cans, which to me suggests that your fuel tank isn't counted in that legislation.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
It's a lot of fuel. I mean, I've had two patrols in my lifetime, and my old one had a long range fuel tank, and I did take a jerry can with me on some trips. Didn't really need it. Yeah, so I think I could take up to 250 litres in the long range tank. I'm not even touching on GVM just yet. We'll get into that shortly.
Yeah, totally.
But that got me. I mean, I could probably leave Adelaide and, roll into Alice Springs on the fumes left in the tank. But I had plenty of other refill options at Cooperpedia and a lot of other places in between there. So I would carry a jerry can, but in reality, I didn't actually need it because I had fuel stations in between.
Well, I guess that's important as well when you're planning a trip and you need to work out how much fuel you're going to take is check how many fuel stops you've got, because you might not actually need to carry it ultimately.
Yeah.
But also fuel consumptions and things like that can vary depending on your load and your terrain and all of that sort of stuff. So taking that into consideration is important too.
Yeah, if you're doing a lot of sand driving and a lot of high rev driving, then you do need to maybe do a little more research around how much your car's likely to use over and above, because highway driving obviously is, I won't say litre per 100 kilometres, but it's fairly consistent on highway driving, how much you get, and you can work out, if you leave here and you highway from here to here, how many litres you're going to use. But if it's sand driving, how many attempts have you got to cross Big Red and that sort of thing, chewing up fuel to get over that, you're going to use more. So you're probably going to have to take extra fuel there. But then there's consideration around, I'm going to load up on extra fuel, And by loading up on extra fuel, I'm using extra fuel to cut that extra fuel.
Totally. Catch-22 style.
There's some balance in the middle there that kind of gets you through, I suppose, or getting through, but also peace of mind knowing that you're safe enough to get through.
Would you carry fuel in a jerry can just as a just in case? Is that something you would ever do?
I have done before, but for the most part, I've not done treks. I've not done a Simpson crossing trek. I should say that. A Simpson desert crossing, sorry. So I can't sort of lay claim to that length of trip without fuel stops. But most of my trips I've had the outback tracks where you pay more for fuel, but I've had fuel stops on the way. I've kind of weighed up that extra cost of fuel as like I would have used extra fuel carrying the extra weight. So I would have
It's interesting that you mentioned that actually because, and I'm so sorry if you're listening, somebody, I can't remember if it was in the Facebook group or the YouTube group, but one of the folks that we've got who tune into our camping show made a point about that in a previous episode when we talked about, I think it was the budget camping episode. We talked about some people choose to fill up fuel in Adelaide when it's really, really cheap and store it to then take it for their trips, because sometimes outback petrol is like ludicrous in cost. But then he made a really good argument for that, in that the additional fuel that you burn in carrying all that extra weight and whatever to take that fuel all that way with you, on top of the fact that supporting rural service stations and businesses in the outback and things like that is also really important. And those fuel stops and fuel stations give you more than just fuel in terms of chatting with locals and feedback from the community and things like that. So that was a really good point to raise, which I hadn't really considered before we touched on it in that other episode. And possibly one to consider as well.
Yeah,
just I think when you're planning for your trip.
Really, really well put, I think, that comment, and supporting those places that help us get from A to B. If it's suddenly not there, then there's a lot of extra distance to cover to the next one. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. But to answer your question, I have carried fuel in a jerry can just in case. Didn't actually need it. Ended up putting it in the fuel tank as soon as I could to get the weight just down inside the fuel tank, but didn't actually need it. And I've kind of taken this progression back from taking that. I would then carry just an empty jerry can in the instance that I might need it, but I didn't need it. So now I don't carry it. But that's for family type outback touring where Strzelecki, Oodnadatta, Birdsville type trips where you've got fuel stops along the way. Yeah. And the road is a known quantity, but it becomes, if you're out there bush bashing and, creating, on a track that is really sandy, really rough, requires a lot of extra, maybe snatch strap, help across river crossings and those sort of things, you're going to use more fuel. So, you do need to consider it in that instance, but consider where it's going to be carried. And I reckon the safest place, if you need to carry the extra fuel regularly, is by getting a long-range fuel tank, because that way it's all in one heavy-duty fuel tank load down in your vehicle. If you need to carry it in jerry cans, there are rules around where you can and can't carry a jerry can. I think, once again, it's got to be out of impact zones. Roof rack is an obvious place to go to, but then have a think about
it's so heavy.
The dynamics of your vehicle and the weight of that on the roof. If you talk about weight, actually, I touched on it before, 250 litres of diesel weighing about 200 kilos, but diesel weighs, we've got some stats in front of us. Don't quote us exactly on these, but ballpark about 830 grams per kilogram.
Per litre.
And petrol about 750 grams. 0.75. I'm trying to convert.
Have you had a coffee this morning?
No, I need another one. I'm trying to convert what's written here from kilograms to anyway, it's 0.75 kilograms per litre. So it's not quite as heavy as water, but it's still pretty heavy. So 20 kilogram or 20 litre. I'm all muddled up. Okay. A 20 litre jerry can on the roof
petrol,
with the weight of the weight of the jerry can as well.
18 kilos or something.
Probably, then
18 kilos.
You've got the weight of the jerry can as well. So it's probably rounded off 20 kilos. So add a few of those up the top. It's a fair bit. So
and diesel apparently is less volatile, and there's not as much legislation or stuff around whether or not you can carry that in your car.
Yeah, I think check once again.
Check.
With the
because I don't think we could find any real definitive information about that, could we?
Not something that we want to say, yes, this is right, that's not. And I guess these things can change too. But it looks like diesel is less volatile. It's not as refined, so it's not classed as a I can't think of the word, like it's not volatile or as explosive or something. So it can be carried inside a vehicle under certain amounts.
Yeah.
Whereas petrol is more sort of volatile, so there's more chance of that vapor or something becoming explosive as well if it does leak.
Yeah.
So yeah, diesel is a little easier to sort of transport than petrol. It's not as dangerous.
About also, you touched on a long range fuel tank before. I'm assuming, because I don't know heaps about this sort of stuff, I'm not like a car buff, but long range fuel tanks would be aftermarket.
Usually.
Yeah. And so if you're looking at a long range fuel tank versus jerry cans, how much weight would a long range geez, when both of us are doing bad today, long range fuel tank add to your vehicle versus jerry cans? Because obviously a long range fuel tank, if that's going to be heavier, it's there 100% of the time versus jerry cans, which you can add in case you need them.
Yeah, you see what I've done to you here? You bring everything back to weight now, don't you?
You have. You've tarnished me, made me think about weight and all that sort of stuff. I mean, obviously you don't have to fill it up. Like if you're just, using your car as an everyday vehicle, you obviously don't have to fill up your whole tank. But yeah, I just thought as a consideration, would it be?
I think it's a good question, and I don't know what the weight difference would be. It's probably it might weigh, if it weighs a little bit more, it's in a better place for the overall dynamics of the vehicle anyway. So my logic
safer
around that would be it's safer, a safer place to store it. It's probably an upgraded tank on top of the one that potentially comes with the vehicle anyway. It's made for the purpose of outback travel, so it's probably made tough. And it's just everything's stored in the one
simple. You don't have to think about it, not extra stuff.
And your fuel gauge on your car. Although I think my long range fuel tank, it took a long time to get off of empty because it was still at the same setting the factory was at or something. So it just sat on full for I don't know how many 100 kilometres before it finally started to come down. So that was on my old car.
You've got a note here that your standard petrol tank in your current petrol gets you about 800 Ks off the tank.
Very loose. But that's what I worked on.
Old petrol that had a long range tank in it got you around about 1,000.
You could probably add about, or maybe even a little bit more than that. You could add 200 to 400 Ks depending on how you're driving and what direction the winds are at and what condition the tyres are in, et cetera.
Yeah, totally. So many variables, but that's interesting.
800 Ks, like what is it across the country? It's about 3,000 from bottom to top, I think.
I don't know, like Adelaide to Melbourne, for example, isn't that like 712 or something? Yeah.
So let's just say it's 300. I think it's about 1,500 Ks to Alice Springs. I should know this because I drove it all the time for a number of years.
Didn't you live there? You lived there for ages.
So I should know this.
Yeah.
So let's just say it's 3,000 Ks to Darwin and I can get 800 kilometres out of it. I've got like plenty of stops in there to refill.
Absolutely.
Once again, that's highway. If you're suddenly doing, a rough outback track, then and you're in four-wheel drive and it's sandy, then it's a different consideration.
Yeah.
But if I needed more fuel all the time, a long-range fuel tank would be my go-to option. It's safe. You're not trying to refill from a jerry can on the side of the road, and it's safely stored inside your fuel tank on the bottom of your car. I guess it becomes an issue if that fuel tank gets a leak, then you're in trouble. But I mean, how many contingencies can you plan for?
That's true. I mean, also when you're thinking about where you're storing your jerry cans to spread them out, if possible, because obviously there are limited options to where you can store your fuel tank.
Yeah.
But if maybe you're in a bing or something happens and all your fuel cans are in the same spot, you lose all the fuel that you've taken with you.
Yeah. I would think roof rack's probably the best option there, with the premise that you've got it on the roof rack and as soon as you can, you're filling up your main tank. So for the most part, you're carrying empty jerry cans on the roof if you need to carry extra fuel.
I suppose maybe you could have some fuel, not like you could have just your emergency fuel up there. Do you know what I mean? If you've got other fuel on your vehicle, you could just have one on the roof rack.
Yep. Yeah. It could be that usually if you've got that much fuel, you've left a city and you've got a few Ks of highway driving first. So, you've chewed through 20 litres and you get that first 20 litre can into your main fuel tank on the way. But I'm only talking from experience with outback roads here, with sort of some side trips and that sort of thing. And in my experience, I've had enough fuel in my actual fuel tanks to get by. I didn't need the jerry cans. So it would be really interesting to hear from any listeners who do more of that outback stuff will find that they have an ongoing reason for fuel over and above what their factory or long-range fuel tank takes and how they manage that. I think that would be really useful information for those thinking, do I need extra fuel? If I do, how am I going to carry it? And, what have other people done that's useful? Because you can read all the guidelines that say this is what you should do, this is what you must do, and everyone's opinion, but it would be good to hear from someone who said, I've done this and this is how I did it and it worked for me.
Yeah, totally.
In X type of car. So, just to give people some guidelines. So you don't end up carrying extra stuff that you don't need, but at the same time, you don't end up stuck halfway because you've, gone underprepared.
Yeah. And fuel storage options like fuel jerry cans, they need to be specifically for fuel.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't just sort of, generally get any jerry can. It has to be a fuel specific one. Make sure they're certified as well.
We've got these in front of us. So these are, I think these are an Australian made one actually.
Were they little, the classic little 5 litre red ones that people use for their, what do you call them? Like lawn mowers and whip snips and things like that. So we've got a couple of these.
They're usually colour coded. You notice too, like they've got like the 5 litre mark on here is just down below the top. So it allows for expansion of the fuel and everything in there. And they're designed to sort of operate on, in hot environments there, it's sort of cater for that expansion of pressure and stuff inside the fuel tank. But they usually you have like red for like petrol, unleaded petrol, yellow I think for diesel, blue you have for water. I mean, you don't have to do this, but
it's good to color code. Then you don't have to be sort of opening up. I mean, I know in the past, because we've had these things and forgotten to write on it, and so you're looking at it and you're like, oh, is this the premix 2-stroke that we've got, and what is this, and trying to smell it and see. It's just write on it or have color coded stuff. It's easy.
Yeah, and probably the main thing is don't store it in the same color container as your water.
That's true.
There's 2 things there. You're going to end up putting water in your fuel tank, which is bad.
Surely not, though. Surely. I mean, you take the cap off of a jerry can and you get you cop a whiff straight away.
You would.
You wouldn't. Yeah. You would. Surely wouldn't you open the can of your jerry and just be like, I'm not copping a whiff of fuel. This is suspicious. Wouldn't your brain do that?
Well, you would think so, but I'm not willing to risk any water getting in my diesel engine because that's the end of my trip, and towing from a remote location is a considerable expense, and I'm trying to avoid at all costs. So,
that's true.
But colour code them. I just have a green jerry can, and you can get green water containers as well, but
is yours metal? Green metal?
A green metal jerry can, whereas the water ones that you can buy are
plastic.
Plastic,
yeah. So, I've heard of fuel bladders.
Oh yeah,
but I don't know anything about them.
It's a bit. I was looking at the other day, and water bladders maybe the same sort of. I'm
just going to do a little bit of Googling here while I'm listening to you.
Maybe heavy duty materials, but I've not heard of them. I guess they can be. I was going to say, I don't know where you'd store them. I was going to say, I guess it's easier to store a soft bladder inside a vehicle, but then you don't really want to be carrying it inside the vehicle anyway, or you're not allowed to. But
it's interesting. They sort of look like, possibly from what I can see, they're like a fuel bladder or a fuel storage bag. They look to be made of some sort of canvas or something, but they're all like khaki or sandy coloured type, possibly more military style.
Yeah, okay.
Things, but there looks to be like ones for polyurethane and stuff like that. I mean, I guess possibly that as an option can give you flexibility if you don't have room, like if you're using a lot of fuel and then you've got a fuel bladder, once it's empty, it packs flat. You can fold it up, from sort of like what we were talking about with the water cells and things like that. It can possibly be handy than having these big empty jerry cans and things like that. But I think possibly if you're using a fuel bladder, it may come with a lot of pros. But then how do you anchor it? Like how do you store it efficiently outside of your vehicle and things like that? I mean, you know what? It might be good for roof racks. If you do need to put fuel on your roof racks, it might be a better option.
If you can store a flat, I didn't see the pictures here, but were they like a flat? If they're a flat
sort of
bladder,
like
I guess.
Looks like you can get different kinds of ones that are essentially like a ginormous goon sack.
I think it's twice you've used the word goon.
Oh, have I?
in this not this episode.
What's the descriptive term? I don't think there's a person in Australia who doesn't visualize exactly what I'm talking about point. Now.
Look, I can see, I've not actually heard of these before, but I can see how that would have a use case for that emergency might need thing, because I've carried an empty jerry can. I've strapped it on its side empty on my roof rack because, they just look like a soft jerry can, right?
Yeah.
So I've strapped it on its side empty on the roof rack. So it's on its side. You probably wouldn't want to store it on its side with it full of fuel. You kind of want the breather at the top to allow the air to escape if it needs to. But a fuel bladder, I guess would roll up somewhere.
Yeah.
And if you needed it, I guess, it'd be interesting to have a look to see what securing options they are. Can you secure it flat on the roof rack?
Some of them had eyelets on them and like D shackles and things like that. So possibly even if you've got a cage trailer or something, you could use carabiners and strap it to the inside of your cage trailer, and I don't know. You'd want it obviously on the axle end.
It would be easy, yeah.
On a ute, that's true.
Yeah.
That'd be really handy, like against the back of the cab.
Yeah, but maybe a few small ones on a roof rack, I suppose.
I don't know. If you use fuel bladders, let us know, because that's really interesting. I'd like to hear more about that, and just why you use them and how you mount them and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
But I think ultimately, what are the takeaways?
Takeaways are, well, I want to say don't load up with too much fuel just because you think you might need it. And I think we haven't really touched on GVM. Well, we did a little bit, but you got to, with all this extra stuff, you got to consider your vehicle weight. And even in some of the research I did before this show, they say take 250 litres of fuel. That's fine. You can do that, but stay within your GVM. And like I said, on the weekend, I took my car to a scrap metal place and I got a weight with a trailer on it and I was able to sort of work backwards. And if I took 250 litres of fuel and had my main fuel tank full, I probably wouldn't be able to put.
Didn't you say you had like 380 kilos left over?
Yeah, 380 kilos of pallet.
So that probably gives you 100 kilos or less left over if you're taking 250 litres of fuel with you.
Yeah, and then I fill the main fuel tank up and I've got 80 kilos left so I can get in the car. And then, I mean, these are very rough figures, but then I've got to add my fridge and my water and all that to it. Really hard to stay under your GVM. Yeah. I have actually had some changes to the suspension, which means I can carry more, but you got to pay for a legal certificate for insurance purposes that says, yes, you can do that. So you can upgrade your GVM with certain modifications, but it costs money. And staying under the factory GVM is actually really hard.
Really hard.
So if you just think, just chuck it on the roof just in case, you change the dynamics of the vehicle. And we've touched on this before. I know I rattle on about weight all the time. I'm a lightweight freak.
We did. If you want to hear more about the lightweight freak, Ben, talking about vehicle weights, you can do that in I think we did a Packing Like a Minimalist episode.
Yeah.
Is the title of not a blog, sorry, title of that episode.
I think it was back in the single digit episodes.
You get passionate about weight. But anyway.
But it's important though, because it's not just for me, it's for the other users on the road. So so don't just load up on fuel. Think, I can get a soft 200 litre fuel bladder and I can store it on the roof. It's going to affect the dynamics of your car. You're going to use extra fuel because you're carrying 200 extra kilos of weight, and you're kind of offsetting what you're carrying it for in a way.
Ultimately.
So I'd say takeaway, do a lot of research around where you're going. If you've only got short stints where you might need to carry extra fuel, consider an emergency empty jerry can, or it'd be great to find out more about those soft fuel bladders because they're a compact thing to store somewhere as a just in case. So you've got a leg of your trip where you're like, I've got 900 Ks or I've got 800 Ks in my instance, but it's off-road sandy track. So I'm probably going to need extra fuel. In that instance, having an emergency thing would be good. But for the rest of the trip, I'm all good. I'm only, 400 Ks between fuel stops. So I don't need to carry extra fuel in. If it's outback tracks, most of the Oodnadatta track, Birdsville track, across the Nullarbor, all those sort of things, you've got enough fuel stops to get there anyway. You don't need to carry all that extra weight and strain on your vehicle. That's my takeaway.
That's
from
takeaway.
Weight. Yeah.
Awesome.
So Sony GVM, storage of fuel, ventilated location, check with your, I'm trying to think of the word.
Regulating authorities.
Yeah,
something along that.
Regulatories.
Check state legislation.
Check state legislation about where you can carry it because you can't put it in impact zones on the car in some instances. So front of the car is no good. Don't put jerry cans on the front because it's an impact zone. If you hit someone else, you're hitting them with full jerry cans. Don't try and avoid carrying it inside the cab as much as you can.
Yeah.
And if you have to, just check once again how much you're legally allowed to carry it and how you can do it safely so that it's ventilated, as long as it's in a ventilated space.
Yeah.
Other takeaways, I think I've rattled on enough.
I think you have. That's a lot of takeaways there.
Yeah. Well, let us know if you've got things to add to this. We'd love to hear about it. Oh, we should actually say we haven't talked about LPG here. This is fuel for cars.
Yes.
If you are interested in storage and transport of LPG, we just did an episode.
Or fuel in terms of liquid fuel stoves and cooking and things like that.
We did an episode not long ago. I don't know what the number is, but check back on that because we do cover off a bit more on the safety around LPG and transport of LPG. We didn't do that in this episode, and we kind of doubled up a little bit on some stuff we talked today about that one as well. So apologies if you feel like you're hearing double, but it is an important thing and something you can probably end up getting very stressed about if you do a lot of research. So if you have got some experience, something to add for all of our listeners who are out there doing outback trips and want to know more about how they can safely transport fuel, get to their destination without headaches and not carry too much, please jump on the Facebook group, The Snowies Camping Show. Ask to join the group if you haven't been there before. Love to hear your feedback. If you know anything about those soft fuel bladders, we'd love to know more about that too.
Totally. And
as Lauren mentioned at the start of the show, if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel via YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for watching.
Thanks,
We'll see you next time.
Catch you next week.
Bye.